Hello and welcome back to my channel. This video today is going to be part 2 on how to lease an apartment in Panama. If you have not already, make sure to go and watch part 1 because it just lays down the foundation of how to even start the search, what website to go to, what things to consider, and then you can get into this part where we're going to the nitty-gritty of what to look out for when you're actually viewing apartments. So if you don't know already, I live abroad in Panama and I have went through the apartment search and looking for an apartment. So these are the things that I didn't know before I did the search. And I promise you, these are super helpful because when I was looking, I didn't find much. I want to give a huge shout out to Abroad Ability. I'm going to link her channel in the description, but she is a person that inspired me to think about these things and also inspired me to do this video because she actually had like a checklist that really helped you figure out every single thing that you should consider. So she inspired me to make my own checklist based off the things that she said and really, tweak it to make sure that I was getting what I needed. So I'm gonna also reference a checklist so that I make sure I'm covering all the things. But yeah, I think she is the one person that I feel like does a thorough explanation of what you should really be looking for when you are searching for apartments. So I'm going to basically add on to that and come from my experience about leasing an apartment. So as I said in the last video, you're going to be meeting with either the real estate agent or the owner or both. I would really encourage that you meet with both the real estate agent and the owner when you're actually doing the viewing of the apartments. Because when you meet with the owner, you get to get a feel of how they are. Like, how do they respond to your questions? Do they seem like they will be responsive? Do you get just a good vibe from them? Because the thing is, if you're just talking to the real estate agent, you really don't get to communicate with the owner. But ultimately, the owner is the person who's going to be your landlord. So you want to make sure you have a good connection with them because not all landlords are the same, especially in Panama. And I'm sorry to say it, I feel like Panama is still working in that area to really do a good job at the leasing apartment process. So I think that finding a good owner / landlord is like top priority. You want to make sure this is a person who is responsible, dependable, transparent, communicative, because what you don't want is get to a landlord who doesn't really respect your time, who doesn't want to fix issues in your apartment, who isn't responsive. That can be your worst nightmares. And I personally know people who have fallen victim to bad landlords. And it's just because I don't think they mean to be bad landlords, but I don't think they quite understand how to actually do it right. So I think there's more to that, but I'll say this for now that I think there's definitely some work that needs to be done in that area. So I really think it is important to get a good landlord. That is the foundation of how to make sure your apartment experience is going to be good. Because if you're going to be in this apartment for 12 months and you're in another country, you want to make sure that you feel cared for. You feel like they care about you. They don't have any issues communicating with you. That's first and foremost. So when you meet the landlord in person during the apartment tour, you can get a feel for that. And if you don't feel comfortable, you don't feel like they're addressing the needs that you have in the apartment in that moment, if you don't feel like they want to answer questions or they're being just odd towards you, then you get to decide that you just don't want to go through with it. And I promise you, if you feel that vibe, you don't feel good about it, don't sign the lease. I promise you, whatever impression you get from the jump from them, it's going to be what you get from them for the rest of that contract. It's not going to get better. So do not assume you see someone and they're like iffy or they act weird or they don't seem responsive. If they're not doing that from the beginning, it's only more than likely going to get worse. So don't do it to yourself. Don't sign that contract if you just do not feel comfortable with that owner. That's just my personal experience. Once you get to the apartment, these are some of the things that I feel like you really want to make sure that you're looking out for. And this isn't in no particular order, but these are some of the issues that can show up in apartments in Panama. Number one is mold. So Panama is a very humid climate. Panama is basically a city in the middle of the jungle. You know, while it is a big metropolitan city with skyscrapers and other big buildings, they had to tear down jungle terrain to make this, you know, that type of landscape. But the weather, you can't get away from that. It feels like a jungle. So it's very hot and it's very humid. Therefore, mold can easily show up in apartments. And it just depends on where it's located, like where the sun is shining on your apartment, where some of the rooms are. Because I had an apartment before, the one that I'm in now, where my bedroom and my closet and my bathroom was very humid. So I had to do things to make sure that mold wasn't an issue in there. Versus the apartment that I'm in now, it's still a apartment, or I still have a bedroom that is like towards the back of the apartment, and the bathroom doesn't have windows, but I do not deal with mold. It's not an issue because just how the apartment sits and where it's facing. But a lot of apartments are susceptible to mold. So make sure when you are walking into that apartment, you are checking every crevice for mold, because sometimes it might be hidden. Sometimes they might even paint over that mold. And the only way you would know is if you get a mold inspection or you ask them for one. Now, if you really want to make sure there's none, then you would have to pay out of pocket for that mold inspection, because more than likely the owner is not going to pay for that for you. Maybe they'll have some kind of like receipt or something to show that they've checked mold lately. Or they just might say to you for verbatim that, you know, mold is not an issue. You get to decide whether you trust them on that. But more than likely, if you want a thorough inspection to make sure there's no mold, you would have to pay for that yourself. Thankfully, the owners that I ran into, they were pretty honest about what it looked like for mold in that apartment. So I didn't run into those issues and I trusted them. But again, if you really want to take a precaution, you would have to pay for an inspection yourself. But mold is a really big issue. And I think if you have it in your apartment, you will sense the symptoms. I'm not a mold expert, but if you constantly have a runny nose, or you have like a cough that won't go away, you're just not feeling well, like you feel really tired all the time, you may have mold in that apartment and you need to get rid of it ASAP. So that's the number one thing you want to check for. So the second thing I would say you want to make sure you ask in your apartment is what is included in your rent. So different apartment owners do different things. So for the most part, it's usually you're paying rent, and whatever you're paying for rent, water is included. But sometimes water can be separate. Other times water and electricity is separate. So you just want to ask what all is included in your rent. Is it water and electricity, or is it just water? Just so you're sure if there's any other types of payments that you have to pay. In addition to that, if you do pay the electricity separate, your owner may still keep it in their name, and then you have to pay them and trust that they pay the electricity, or they keep it in their name and then they give you access to pay it, or they change it into your name and you just pay it directly. So you, again, have to just make sure you know how the electricity is getting paid so it doesn't get cut off on you, okay? So that's the second thing. Another thing are the AC units. That's something that for me is different than in the States. If there is AC in a building, I don't really have to worry about the maintenance on it. But in Panama, the tenant is responsible for maintaining the AC units. So there's a check that you have to do on the AC units about every 4 months. So basically, you should just make sure that the AC units are running correctly, and there's no issues with them. So ask about that, because they may not tell you up front, but so far I've seen that it is the tenant that's responsible for that maintenance. So you pay for a person to come in and make sure that the AC unit is clean and that it's running correctly. And again, because Panama is very humid, you want to make sure that's taken care of. Yeah, I have not yet seen an owner pay for that out of pocket. So just make sure you know that you'll be doing that and know how much it costs, because usually they can refer you to a person, a technician that can come out and do that. And what I've seen is about $30 to $40 each unit. So depending on how many units you have in your apartment, then it'll be, it'll range in price. But that is something that you're expected to do, and more than likely the cost will fall on you. So just check with them to see how often they do it and if they can refer you to somebody and how much about the cost will be. Another important question to ask them is, when was the last gas inspection done on the building? So in Panama, there are gas inspections done on the buildings every couple of years. So the month and year that they do it, the gas will be turned off for that amount of time that they're doing it. So basically, if the last time they did the inspection was 3 years ago, then it might be time for another inspection, and it might fall during your contract, which means that you may not have gas for that X amount of time. I've heard it can go off for 1 week, and for some people, it's been like 2 weeks. So that's something to consider, right? Because if you don't have gas for that time, you may not be able to run your stove. You may have other things in your apartment that you may not be able to use. So that's something you want to consider. When was the last time the inspection was done, and when will the next one be, so that you make sure you can prepare for the next one, knowing that you may not have gas for that time. Another thing to consider are your appliances, specifically your washer and dryer and your stove. Your washer and dryer can be run by electric or gas. Every unit is different, so that just helps you consider how much more you'll be spending, because if it's run by electric, then you know that that's something that you have to consider in your spending, because you're going to be paying the electricity out of pocket, versus if it's run by gas, the gas is usually included in your rent. I have had both scenarios, and I don't really see a difference in my bill, whether the washer and dryer is run through electricity or gas. So that's just me personally, but again, that just may be something to consider to make sure that you're accounting for, okay, my washer and dryer is going to be run through, electricity versus gas. Also, the same thing with your stove, something to consider. Is it going to be gas? Is it going to be electric? So if it's electric, your bill may be a little bit higher versus if it was run with gas. All of my stoves so far have been gas, which I prefer, just because they run better. And yeah, that's going to be included in my rent, so I don't have to worry about that issue, and how it may fluctuate with my bill. The only thing that I'm worried about with electric is the lights and the AC, how often you run the AC. So that's something that you just have to make sure you manage to know that, okay, you're good on that. Another thing to ask is, and I've mentioned this a little bit in the last video, is basically who will you call for a maintenance issue? Because sometimes the owner is the person you talk to directly, but sometimes you talk to whoever are the maintenance people in the building. So it just depends. So I know for me, there are issues where if I just call the maintenance person, they'll come in and fix it for me. But depending on how big the job is, then it is something that my owner will take care of and possibly communicate with the maintenance to do it for me, or she'll hire somebody else to come into the building to do what needs to be done. So you just want to ask them, the owner, so who's going to be responsible for like small maintenance issues? Who is my person that I go to? So I have several people that I kind of have on hand that were provided to me by my owner that I can call for different things. But if I have a big issue, then I just reach out to my owner directly, and then she'll make sure she takes care of it. But before this, I had an owner who was very hands-on. So any issue that I had, she was the one that took care of it. Like, she directly took care of it. There was really nothing that she sourced out or had somebody else do. She was the one that handled it. So in both situations, I was fine, because as long as it's handled, that's all that matters to me. But you just want to make sure you know your point of contact if something happens, so that you can make sure you're doing that, things get done. The last thing that I think is very important is looking at the contract and negotiating your contract. So in Panama, again, the process is more like home buying. So the owner isn't held to a particular regulation based on the building that they're in. So it's different than in the States, where they have a certain like amount that they can raise the rent, and based on that, they can't negotiate certain prices, but you can negotiate what price you want. So even before signing the contract, they're going to give you the number, like, this is how much the apartment is per month. And you can say, would you consider this price instead, and I'll pay a higher deposit? Or just saying, I saw another apartment that had similar things in it and I want to pay this price. Could you consider that? I've done that with both of my apartments. And with the first apartment, she didn't want to negotiate. She felt like she was giving me a good price for what I had, and I agreed. And in the second apartment, the first apartment, she had already lowered the price too. So I agreed that it was fine to keep it that way. The second apartment, I was able to negotiate, because I let her know what I was looking for, and the fact that I had another option that was basically quite similar, the same layout for a lower price, and therefore she was able to negotiate with me, and we kind of met in the middle. So the prices that you pay are negotiable. Do your research. If you see an apartment that has the exact same thing that you have in a very similar location on the same floor, and you can see the difference in prices, you can say that and say, hey, could you honor this price instead? Okay. Secondly, look at that contract and make sure that everything that you feel should be on there is on the contract. That's something that I had to do, and it wasn't big things, but it was things that I wanted to make sure were in writing, so that it would be addressed if anything were to happen. This was like the maintenance thing. I wanted to make sure in writing I knew who was the person that I was reaching out for maintenance issues. And then I wanted her to clarify what were the maintenance issues that she was taking care of. Because in the contract, it was very vague. It just said that she would take care of maintenance issues that came up. But I wanted to make sure what were the things that she would agree upon would be taken care of. Because if it's written in a contract, then it's hard to not honor that, It's harder for the person to just say they're not going to do it. So make sure you read that contract. The contracts for apartments are usually only 3 pages, literally, because they get straight to the point. There's not a bunch of language or lingo that's like complicated. They write out basically all the things you need to know, how to pay the rent, who you're paying rent to, how much rent is, how to take care of maintenance, how to take care of the apartment, what you can and cannot do, That's basically it. Like, there's not much that you have to sift through. So take your time, go ahead and translate the contract, because more than likely it's going to be in Spanish. But literally, Google Translate does a good job of translating the contracts, because again, it's not super complicated lingo. If you just copy and paste it in Google Translate, you'll see everything. And then you can decide, okay, what are the things I need to tweak? Okay. And then, speaking of contract, what you want to make sure you know, what is the penalty for breaking your lease? So know what that penalty is, how much it is, and make sure that's written in the contract. And then 2, how much notice do you need to move out? Okay. So if you want to move out, how much notice do they need to let you know? Because again, that can vary between owners. Some owners want 1 month's notice. Some owners may want 2 months notice. It just depends. So far, I've only run into 1 month's notice, which I think is pretty good, you know? So make sure that's written in your contract and you know what it is that, you know, you can expect just in case if something goes wrong. Because honestly, that's what a contract is, right? To make sure everything is outlined and all the possible scenarios are addressed, because you just never know, right? You live in another country, something can come up, you may have to go back home, you may have to, you know, take care of something. So just know what it is that's gonna happen if things change. So for me, all of those things were the things that I made sure was outlined and I knew for my contract to make sure I felt comfortable moving in. And with all of those things, I really did not run into too many issues. But like I said, I think the top thing is to make sure your owner is a good owner. Vet your owner, because if you just go with somebody and they are not responsible, you're gonna have so many issues. You're gonna be frustrated, especially the fact that you're already abroad and you're trying to like navigate things and you have a bad owner. Like, it's gonna make your experience so much worse, and you don't want that. So I think it's best to look at least 3 apartments. Just look at least at 3, so then you can meet 3 different owners and actually get a sense, because that may help too. Because maybe if you just go see one owner, you may not be sure like if this is a good situation or not. But I feel like if you see several owners, you can compare and see, okay, how do they show up? Do they show up the way that I need them to, or does that person show up the way that I need them to? So that way you can hopefully have a really, really great experience living in Panama. So if these tips were helpful, please be sure to let me know. If you have any further questions about the process that you feel like I didn't address, please let me know as well. You can always book a consultation to talk more about these things and just your moving abroad to Panama situation in general. But thank you so much for watching today's video. I will see you all at the next one. Bye.